Joining us now is Lee Rendell, Senior Pre-Sales Manager of Kaspersky, a well-known global security vendor of 25 years, with a well-established threat intelligence capability powered by their world-leading team of researchers and analysts. Lee, it's a real pleasure to have you with us today. Thanks for making time.
No problem, KB. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to talking threat intelligence with you.
Lee, I'm curious to know from your perspective, how do you define or describe threat intelligence service that Kaspersky's offering? Because historically, Kaspersky isn't super well known for doing this. I'm really keen to hear from your perspective a little bit more.
Yeah, it's something that we battle with quite a lot at Kaspersky. We have a very large portfolio of products and services. So obviously we're mainly known as an endpoint vendor, but we've been doing threat intelligence and had industry leading threat intelligence now for a long period of time. So it's really hard to get that across to the general public. But what I will say is threat intelligence is the backbone, it's the core of everything that we do. So whether we're protecting someone's endpoint, someone's mobile phone, whether we're doing anti-drone security or blockchain security, threat intelligence is what drives everything at Kaspersky. And that's why we're one of the leaders in threat intelligence and threat intelligence services that wrap around that.
So, just touching a little bit more about threat intelligence, would you say that there are companies out there that claim they do threat intelligence, but in fact they don't?
That's a hard question to answer. Threat intelligence is a really broad subject, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I think any any person who or any company that provide a database of detections to an organization could claim that they provide threat intelligence. Um, a lot of companies that we see are heavily reliant on open source data scraping rather than their own internal methodologies for collecting and verifying threat intelligence. So yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, but I would always say to any organization that are looking at threat intelligence services, dig a bit deeper into how that organization gather that threat intelligence and what vetting and verification goes into that before it's delivered to the organization. Um, a lot of times it's data, and data can be useful, but data becomes intelligence with context. So once you can then add context to data, you get intelligence, and that's what we try to do at Kaspersky is to make sure that everything we do is delivered with rich context, so it's actionable, it's meaningful, and it's relevant to the organization.
Would you be able to explain a little bit more about how Kaspersky gathers that intelligence?
Well, we gather it from a huge number of sources. Obviously, we have a huge footprint in both the home user and the corporate market when it comes to endpoint security. Part of our solution is the ability for the general user or organization to participate in something we call KSN. And KSN is the Kaspersky Security Network, and this is a cloud-based reputational service hosted geographically, mainly in Switzerland for European countries. And this allows us to uh, analyze new threats based on metadata from those machines in real time, and that builds a lot of our kind of general detections that we do automated. Then we've got our web crawlers that are going scraping and so on, websites and social media and iframes, our bot farms. So one of the key areas of Kaspersky over a number of years is the ability to um, reach out across the vast internet. So our bot farms and spam traps are extensive, which means that we get to see this stuff primarily at the very early stages. So that forms a big part of our botnet tracking and phishing tracking service. We have all our sensors and honeypots and so on. We monitor passive DNS. We've got our partners like Interpol and other global certs around the world, and then we collect open source information as well. And again, on top of that, we're doing all of the deep net and darknet chatter and forum analysis and paste bin analysis and so on and so forth. What happens then is that goes then through a very strong verification process. So right at the tip of the spear is our great team, our global research analysis team. These are the guys, these are men and women spread across the globe that are tracking, identifying, and monitoring the most sophisticated cybercrime gangs out there, what we call APT gangs. So they verify the data, they're doing their own analysis of this data. It goes through the Kaspersky SOC, it goes through the Kaspersky Red Team, and it goes through our Kaspersky Industrial Cert. Once we verified all that information, it then gets packaged into relevant threat intelligence services and then delivered to the customer. Because of this verification process, obviously false positives are pretty much near zero, which is uncommon for threat intelligence.
So when you say you've got threat intelligence, package it up, which is then information for clients to leverage internally, right? So can you talk to me a little bit more about that? Because one of the things that I've noticed is there's this overwhelm of data that exists, which therefore it almost feels like people's eyes start glazing over. So I'm curious to know, how does Kaspersky communicate, I guess, the main things that people should be focusing on? Because like you just explained, there are so many sort of forms of data. Like how do you guys sort of, I guess, illuminate what companies should be focused on?
Well, I mean, from my personal perspective and what we do in the UK, and this is replicated across the globe with Kaspersky, is when it comes to any solution or service that we sell, I don't just want to sell a point solution to a customer and say, there you go, and it's your responsibility. So what we try to do in threat intelligence is work with the organization. Before any organization take on threat intelligence, they need to do their own housekeeping. They need to understand where they fit. So for most organizations, APTs aren't really going to be a concern. Okay, it's still primarily a concern of a small subset of huge enterprises, governments, and military, and so on. So most organizations, their main concern, what keeps them up at night, is ransomware. That's and anything that goes alongside that. So first of all, an organization needs to understand what internal policies and controls they have in place already. Where is their crown jewels? So what's their main assets that they need to protect? What's their main risks to those assets if they were to get encrypted or leaked, and so on? What tools do they have in place already to use threat intelligence? Do they have some kind of log management system like a SIEM or a SOAR platform? Or are they not quite there yet? And they're at the very early stages. So we have like a three-tiered approach. We have what we call foundation level, optimum level, and expert level, and that's kind of how we tier different types of threat intelligence services depending on what's going to be most useful for the organization. In most cases, when they're starting out with threat intelligence, the first thing that an organization should be doing, after they've already assessed their own capabilities, is to get some kind of log management system. A SIEM, a security information events management system, is the most common use case for that, and that collects centralized logs and does some aggregation and correlation. That's very useful, and that's your starting point. The next kind of element to that is to ingest intelligence into that log management system to start to map and match events that are happening on the network to a set of known malicious IOCs, indicators of compromise, whether that's communications to a malicious URL, the execution of a malicious hash, and so on and so forth. And that's kind of like the foundation, the bedrock for threat intelligence. And obviously, then we go up through the tiers in terms of what we call operational threat intelligence. How can we start to ingest threat intelligence automatically into some kind of instant response workflow? And then we're looking at maybe organizations that have an instant response process. A lot of organizations don't have an instant response process. So what do they have in place to do instant response, and how can Kaspersky's threat intelligence assist them, in maybe as a second opinion or additional verification or the detonation of suspicious samples or some attribution to a sample. And then once we go up even further, we're looking maybe at stuff like strategic threat intelligence with an organization, where we're starting to look at general trends, and that's more for the board. They don't need to know necessarily the individual tactics, techniques, and procedures of a threat actor, but they need to know what type of threat actors are most likely going to target our organization, and how have they evolved over the years? What type of exploit kits are they using in a general sense? So how can we be more strategic with our defenses that mean that we're future proofed from attacks 2-3 years down the line? And then ingesting targeted threat intelligence, so not generic threat intelligence, but specific to the sector or industry in which that organization works. But most of the time it's down to the capabilities, size of the organization, size of the team. Are they a SOC or not? Would indicate what type of threat intelligence that is going to be best useful for them. And that's how we do it at Kaspersky. We work quite closely with each organization to make sure they get the best out of us. Generally, threat intelligence is separated into 4 kind of key pillars. You've got technical threat intelligence. That would be stuff like data feeds. So something that's pushed automatically into the network to look for matches internally. So it's mainly like a login, a detection mechanism for stuff that's already happened inside the network. Then you've got operational threat intelligence. Like I said before, that's how you can ingest threat intelligence into an instant response workflow to do research and investigations. Then you've got tactical threat intelligence. Tactical threat intelligence is where you're looking at the individual TTPs or of specific threat actors. So you're understanding what type of threat actors are most likely going to target you because of the industries and maybe geographical locations in which they operate. Then you're looking at their tactics, techniques, and procedures with the MITRE mapping framework, and looking at their IOAs, so their indicators of attack. And then you start to put controls and processes in place to identify this type of behavior if it occurs on your network, and put in obviously mechanisms in place to not only detect but remediate that. And then at the top level, then you've got strategic threat intelligence, which generally would sit up slightly above the kind of the technical guys and girls, would be mainly at the kind of board level where they're looking at the general threat landscape. And something that we do, and we work quite closely with organizations, is inside all of our APT reports, there is executive summary, and the executive summary is for that purpose. It's to give you a more general, the report in a nutshell. So not the technical analysis of the malware and reverse engineering or the exploit analysis. It's a general overview of the campaign that this threat actor is embarking on. And that's then for those strategic conversations. How can we look at how threat trends and APT groups are evolving over the years, and what are Kaspersky's predictions for the next couple of years when it comes to that?
So I asked this question because I'm curious to hear from you, Lee. Like, where does Kaspersky's sort of solution sort of tie into the overall ecosystem?
Threat intelligence is really that. It's the backbone. Everything that we do is driven through threat intelligence. It bolsters all of our AV engines, our behavioral analysis, machine learning engines inside all of our endpoint solutions and EDR solutions, and mail security solutions. It allows directly within our endpoint management console the ability to and automatically go in and look for additional information inside the threat intelligence portal. For Kaspersky endpoint security customers and EDR customers, they can, once they get detection, they can then click on that hash and it automatically put it up into the Kaspersky Threat Intelligence portal to get maybe the global verdict from Kaspersky, not just the local verdict within that network, and then also some additional context regarding that type of detection. And that's kind of how our ecosystem works. Obviously, as we move into the future, the aim for Kaspersky is to bring that ecosystem even more fluid. So, as I said, we've got huge numbers of products and services, and trying to make them all communicate and share information that's visible to the end user is the key goal and the key aim for Kaspersky.
Now I'm really curious about this next question. What does Kaspersky provide in terms of business outcomes compared to its competitors? That's why I was sort of asking a little bit more about the strategic side of things, because there's a lot of these mid-level players that are sort of just giving this overwhelm of data. So I'm really curious now, because the thing that's really interesting in this space is a lot of people now are claiming they do threat intelligence. And you alluded to it before. Some people just really doing OSINT and then doing a fancy UI UX on the top. And that's not necessarily threat intelligence. So I'm really keen to hear from your perspective. How are you guys different?
Well, I would say we've always practiced quality over quantity. And I think for any organization that are looking to get in threat intelligence, um, obviously you need to get threat intelligence from different types of sources, and that's fine. But it should it should always be quality of the data over quantity, and that's something that we've always had at Kaspersky. That's how we do it. And that's the feedback we get from organizations that use Kaspersky's threat intelligence, is that they can trust data. When it comes to business outcomes, that means that they don't they get less alert fatigue, because they're not having to investigate stuff that's been triggered from a piece of threat intelligence, a data feed, and that actually turns out to be a false positive. They can trust. So everything they get from Kaspersky, if we say it's dirty and we say it's bad, they can pretty much trust without additional verification that that is the case. And then if it's worth investigating with all of the rich context in which we supply as well, it gives them all of the mechanisms and all the tools to say, yeah, this is something that we definitely need to look at, and these are the things we need to look for. So in terms of business outcomes, it's the cost of ownership. The mean time to respond is so much lower because they can trust the data. They don't have to do additional verification. They don't have to second guess what is being said, and that's the feedback we get from all of the customers that and organizations that use Kaspersky Threat Intelligence, is the quality of data is just so high.
So when you say quantity over quality, what do you mean specifically though when you say that? So how are you sort of validating like this is quantity? Quality
So
versus quantity.
quality, yeah. So obviously, as you mentioned before, open source threat intelligence is useful, but there are a lot of organizations that provide open source threat intelligence, but they don't do the additional verification. So they get a list of IOCs, a list of hashes, a list of URLs, and that is just supplied to the customer as it is, with very little context, very little additional information. And as of obviously open source can be useful and should be something that organizations use sparingly, um, but because it does increase a lot of false positives. Then what they do is then in most cases the organization or the customer have them request further information for a detection, and then that uplifts the cost and so on and so forth. What we do is we do the open source verification prior to the customer receiving the data. So every single piece of information that is provided by Kaspersky's threat intelligence services is gone through a very heavy vetting system, and because of that, we can quite openly, and we say in quite openly in public, with threat intelligence, it's pretty much a near zero false positive level, whether that's vulnerabilities, whether that is APTs, whether that is CNC tracking for APT infrastructure that is being stood up over the last 24 hours. Uh, we're confident that what we give you is real, is relevant, and there is rich context to go and actually investigate that and remediate that. It's not just a list of hashes, which is what it used to be. This is how we've evolved in Kaspersky's threat intelligence. When we first started, our feeds were just a list of hashes, a list of URLs. But over time, through feedback from the customers and um, working with other organizations and improving our capabilities in terms of our service, we now have rich context. So within a data feed, it's not just the hash, it's the top 10 URLs that distribute that hash, the top 10 URLs that hash talks to, how popular it is, the geographical regions we see it most in, first seen, last seen, what type of attack it is, and all this kind of stuff gives you rich context to go and investigate. And that's really important. A list of hashes is really no use to anyone. Um, you need to know why that hash is there, and what can it do, and what does it talk to, and that's how we do it. So we have, like I said, we have rich verification and context to all of our threat intelligence, and I think that stands us out above the competition.
I read that actually in the literature that you sent across. I think it was near zero false positives. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you said earlier you're quite confident. So how confident are you? Are you quite confident or very confident?
Well, I'm sure the researchers and the teams, the experts that are far more technical than me, um, will say they're very confident. I don't get privy to those investigations and that information, so I'm pretty confident, um, because I'm slightly removed from that level of the guys who are actually collecting and correlating this information. But as a vendor, if I'm speaking personally, I'd say pretty confident. If I'm speaking as a vendor, we're very confident. Otherwise, we wouldn't put it in writing, for that. And we have 20 petabytes of data available to organizations at their fingertips. Huge amounts of information, but then we drill it down to what's relevant to them.
Just to press on the near zero false positives, do you think that is quite a bold statement, though?
I think it is. I think um, whenever you make statements that can be disputed, and saying anything like 100% detection rates, or saying anything like we stop every attack, which I've seen other cybersecurity vendors claim, you'll open yourself up to people trying to prove you wrong, and it can throw back in your face. So for us to come out and say that, obviously we will never come out and say we detect 100% of threats, because it's not true. It's not true for anyone. Um, so for us to come out and say we supply near zero level of false positives with threat intelligence, we have to be very confident, because it's a message that uh, could come back to haunt you. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that if we've come out and said that, then we mean it, and we've proven it over 25 years.
How do you have that assurance in terms of, what we've sort of just been discussing here around the near zero? How do you consistently have that assurance that, yes, it's never 100% and people shouldn't be claiming 100%, which maybe it's 95, maybe it's 99% near zero false positive. How do you guys actually provide that ongoing assurance, though, to ensure that those numbers stay at that level, per se?
Well, that's because we're constantly evolving with the current threat landscape. We have huge teams of dedicated experts that are constantly pushing themselves. We push ourselves as an organization to meet the standards that we've set for our customers. We expect to hit certain levels, for our customers that use any of our products. To have 99.997% detection rates with our endpoint security. It's something that we're proud of. Um, it's just a constant game of improving, looking at what's happening, finding new ways of detection, um, upskilling ourselves, and constantly pushing ourselves to get better. And that means that we're always pushing for that 100%. We're never satisfied. We're not satisfied with 99.97%. We want 100%. And that's how we keep on top of it, because we don't rest on our laurels. We're constantly trying to get better and better and better and better, and that benefits us and benefits our customers.
So you mentioned before, Lee, around looking at the threat landscape continuously and always going that extra bit further. Would you say that Kaspersky is doing that more than perhaps other vendors in the space, in the threat intelligence space?
I would say certainly for longer. We were looking for APTs before we knew that APTs were APTs. So we were analyzing this stuff without the I guess the term being coined, and understanding what these types of attacks were completely. We were already detecting them and already looking for them. We've been doing threat research, um, for a huge number of years. One of the key things to us and our great team, our global research analysis team, is that we are completely non-biased. So we track attacks emitting, propagating from any region, a target in any region that come from any source. It doesn't matter to us who's attacking who. We will detect it and we will write about it. and we will supply that information to our customers that we protect or supply threat intelligence to. And I think that's why so many of the leading researchers want to work for Kaspersky as part of our great team, because they have that freedom to research and do what they want to do. They have that freedom to go and research different types of threats depending on what industry they're most interested in, whether it's industrial or financial or retail or government or military. We don't care where it comes from. We don't care who it's attacking. Our main goal, our main responsibility is to detect it and tell people about it. And I think that's why our great team are leading researchers in the world, is because we have that non-biased view, that complete overview. Whereas maybe in other organizations, there's certain regions that are whitelisted. So if it propagates from certain countries, they won't tell you about it. We don't need to go into who specific vendors are or whatever, but it's not something that we do at Kaspersky. So we're pretty open with, if an attack comes from Russia and it's attacking someone else, then if we know about it, we will write detections for it and we will tell people about it. It doesn't matter, even if it's the country of origin of our founder. And obviously we're a global company, but if we're known as being a Russian founded organization, should we say? But if attacks come out of Russia, we don't bypass them. We tell you just the same if it comes from the UK or China or North Korea. It doesn't matter to us. We're there to protect customers, not to work strategically with any relevant governments or other large organizations. Our responsibility is to the truth of our information, the truth of our data. That's our responsibility.
When you say leading researchers, who says they're leading?
We do. Industry forums would do. Other researchers would do. Obviously, we work with huge law enforcement agencies like Interpol. We share our research, share our expertise with them. So that in itself would indicate a leading status. We have done keynote. Our research has done keynote presentations, a lot of the leading kind of security analyst summits and other kind of industry events. They're widely regarded as some of the best in the industry.
That's fair. Now, Lee, you have touched on this earlier in the interview, but I'm keen to sort of explore this in a little bit more fidelity. Now, over time, what shortcomings or problems have been identified in Kaspersky's threat intelligence solution, and how did this help shape the product development? You sort of alluded to earlier that when you started, that of course it was just your typical OSINT sort of data collection, and then you guys have obviously evolved since then. So I'm really keen to sort of explore that a little bit more with you, if you could shed a little bit more light around how that journey's sort of progressed.
Yeah, I think as we discussed previously, when we were first starting to do threat data feeds, they were just a list of IOCs. So from that perspective, over time, we started to provide additional context, and meaningful context, and more feeds, more relevant feeds. We have feeds now specific to industrial networks, which are obviously relevant only to organizations that have SCADA and SCADA equipment, or SCADA, if you like to call it SCADA, but it's not relevant to maybe a wider audience. With the APT reports and crimeware reports and ICS reports, in the past, that was just a report, a human readable report, which is nice and can be useful. But what we've done over time is provide all of the machine readable stuff on the back of those reports. So as well as having the human readable side, we now provide all of the IOCs as an open IOC format. We provide the YARA rules, we provide the Suricata IDS rules, and we provide all the APT threat data feeds in JSON, sticks, taxi, whatever format the organization can ingest. So we've kind of evolved to provide better data, I would say. So more change in data into intelligence, where we can. Where we've kind of improved within our threat intelligence portal, which is our kind of centralized console for a lot of our threat intelligence services, not all of them, but the main bulk of the threat intelligence services. In the past, it was one portal, but everything was kind of individual, so nothing really linked together. So what we've done over the last couple of years certainly is to bring that together. So now we provide threat intelligence portal as a bundle, so you get access to a certain number of different things under one license, and you can search within one area and it will search across all of the threat intelligence portal, not just within an individual area. And that's been very useful. It's had great feedback from organizations that use it, the ability to put a hash here and it will search for that in the threat lookup portal. It will search for it in the APT report, see if it's inside a report. In the threat actor profiles, it will search for it in the digital footprint intelligence, so the brand monitoring intelligence that we supply for organizations as well. So it will search across all of those different areas. If is it found in the dark net or the deep web, on the surface web, and provide all that information in one kind of panel. So that's been a massive change and improvement to how the threat intelligence portal works, rather than just the individual services.
Would you say historically as well that perhaps you did have a higher amount of false positives, and then obviously over time, as you sort of touched on in this interview, why that's diminishing and it's near zero? Would you say that's the case historically when you guys sort of started out doing this type of service?
There's a very good argument to say that, yeah, maybe in the past there was more false positives, and then we've put more processes and controls and verification mechanisms in place to make sure that we whittle that down to as close as zero as possible. Um, But in terms of numbers, I couldn't tell you what the false positive rate would have been 5 years ago compared to now, because I don't know that information. But yeah, I think you could be right in saying that, obviously, because like I said, we're constantly trying to improve. We don't want to stagnate. We want to constantly push ourselves, because the threat landscape is moving all the time. What was relevant 5 years ago is completely different now. So we have to evolve. We have to keep changing, and we have to go with the times. And we want to get ahead of the threats. We want to be able to know about this stuff before they've even thought that they're going to do it. If that makes sense. So and that comes down to our own internal drive to be the best.
So, what does the roadmap look like for Kaspersky's threat intelligence service?
So the roadmap, um, what we're trying to provide is more and more integrations, because threat intelligence portal on its own is very, very useful. Um, However, in most cases, that threat intelligence is being pushed into another internal service. It could be another cloud service, and so on, but it could be, like I said, like a SIEM or a SOAR platform, or a threat mining solution, or a network control solution. So for us at Kaspersky, the aim is to provide integrations to as many different SIEMs and SOAR platforms as possible. So where the roadmap is going is to provide more different types of connections, more different types of integration, to make that seamless to an organization, make it very easy to take on uh, the benefit of Kaspersky's data, and pulling together the threat intelligence services that we have into other areas of Kaspersky's portfolio. So for existing Kaspersky customers in other areas, the ability to utilize additional elements of the threat intelligence portal as and when they need to, for a seamless API within an endpoint to the platform, or from our email security to the APT reports, for example. So it's to bring uniformity across all of our solutions. And threat intelligence, as I said, is that kind of, it's always been that foundation, that backbone of everything we do. So it would make sense that that becomes the backbone for all of our products, in terms of a graphical, what the users can see, sense, not just what's happening in the background. And that's kind of where the roadmap is going. Anyway, from what I can publicly say, anyway.
So, how should organizations evaluate threat intelligence sources?
Well, the first thing they need to do is they need to understand um, their own risk levels. So where where are they most likely to be attacked from? what current controls and processes do they have in place? Where's their data? So where is it stored? What type of data is it? How can that data be used and leveraged by attackers? So what's their crown jewels? So there's a certain amount of risk analysis that needs to go in place within an organization, which we would work alongside with them to evaluate what type of threat intelligence is going to be best suited to them. They need to understand what size security team they have, what capabilities do they have. Are they doing instant response? Do they have an instant response process or not? What type of tools they have at their disposal already that threat intelligence could be utilized within? And then from there, they can start to evaluate the different types of threat intelligence sources to see which ones are going to give them the best information. For example, they may say that their main risk is through credential leakages, so or insider attacks, or their supply chain. So in that case, if they've identified that as their biggest risk to their business, then they want to start looking at threat intelligence sources that address those needs, and whether that is, for example, within Kaspersky's digital footprint intelligence is there to look for data leakage, credentials being bought and sold, insider attacks, brand monitoring, and so on and so forth. If it's supply chain attacks, then they want to be a bit more strategic about APT threat actors and who are they targeting in terms of industries, and how are they targeting them, and what type of toolkits and exploit kits are they using in order to successfully breach these organizations. And that's the type of threat intelligence that you'd want to look at and ingest from them. So it's all about understanding as an individual organization what your current capabilities are and where your biggest risks lie to your business. And then from that moment, that purpose, and from that point, then you then work with vendors like Kaspersky in terms of identifying which areas of threat intelligence are going to be most useful for the organization, going to give them reasonable use cases that allow them to get data that they can action and put not just reactive but proactive measures in place as well. But it comes from looking internally before you start to look externally.
What makes threat intelligence useful and important? Now, I ask this because I've historically been an analyst myself, and just looking at lots of numbers is like one thing, but it's actually another thing to actually derive insight from those numbers. Like, what do they actually mean? And then substantiate those numbers to actually do something about it. So, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
Like I said, threat intelligence should always form part of a wider cybersecurity strategy. So where it's useful is to bolster existing toolkits that you have in place. So you're going to have, or any organization should have a certain amount of detection capabilities. They should all have an endpoint security. They should all have some gateway solutions. They should all be protecting the network traffic. Where threat intelligence can become useful is to do mainly one or two things internally is to bolster detections, because if there's a missed detection on your particular endpoint vendor, but the event is sent to the log management system like a SIEM, then an additional data feed from another vendor, for example, might have that detection inside that data feed that then they wouldn't have otherwise got. And that's kind of one typical use case when you're looking internally of how threat data can be useful, is to pulling different vendors' opinions on stuff. It's not their engine, it's not their behavior analysis stuff, but it's known detections from that particular vendor. The other one is to provide additional context to a detection. So in most cases, when you have a detection or you have an alert, the alert stands within itself. A communication to this IP address was made, and this IP address is a known CNC server, for example. Where threat intelligence can come in is to provide context on that. So, for example, what's the most common piece of malware that are distributed from that CNC server? What pieces of malware or entities talk to that CNC server? what geographical regions is that most being seen in? When was the first time and last time that we saw it? And that aids in their investigation. Having a detection is one thing, but then if to go, okay, this CNC server is actually is communicated to by these number of hashes, and then we need to search our machines for these hashes because maybe we've got the malware, but they hasn't communicated yet. So maybe that's stage 2 of their kill chain, and we're looking at, we need to try and find stage 1, the point of entry, the root cause. So threat intelligence can provide the relevant context that allows the organization to actually go and investigate and go and hunt an additional stuff. Where it can be useful when you're looking externally is to map your company's risk level, to map what type of entities are most likely going to be a problem for us. And as I said, most of the time, it's not going to be APTs for the vast majority of organizations. We have seen a trickle down, where in the past, APTs were primarily only focused on like cyber espionage and cyber destruction. And it was, in a lot of cases, state-sponsored, going after other kind of governments and military and doing the same things that governments have always done and try to know what's on the other side and so on and so forth. But there's been a trend over the last couple of years, certainly, where a lot of APT groups are investing in kind of a monetary arm of their toolkits, where there's a financial gain, where they're looking for financial gains from attacks, not just cyber espionage. And because of that, obviously, their victim scope increases. So they start to go after like large retailers and other kind of important businesses where they can leverage the data to hold it to ransom and so on and so forth. And what we've also started to see over the last couple of years is code that has been created by these APT groups, very sophisticated code, being utilized by a broader scope of cybercrime gangs, where this is being sold, these toolkits that they wouldn't otherwise have access to are being sold to other cybercrime gangs to utilize. So then you could kind of see IOA map into an APT, but actually it's because they're using this not less sophisticated cybercrime gang have just purchased and now using this toolkit. And then they'll go over a much broader scope of victims. So when you're looking outside, any type of organization, you want to look at what type of industry, what type of attacks are hitting my industry, where are they coming from traditionally, what type of TTPs are they generally using, and that's where threat intelligence can become useful, because you can be proactive to your defenses rather than reactive. We can start to look at how a particular campaign is from this particular actor is formulated, and then close the doors off that mean that we can't be a victim of this particular, or if we are, we know we're going to stop it at stage 1 or stage 2, and we can contain it and investigate it then. And that's kind of how threat intelligence in its simplistic cases can be useful for an organization.